When my grandson was born, the security guard stopped me at the maternity ward entrance. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said quietly, avoiding my eyes. "Your daughter-in-law only authorized immediate family members." I stood there holding a blue teddy bear, a bouquet of white roses, and a knitted baby blanket I had spent 3 weeks making with my arthritic hands. For a moment, I honestly thought there had been some mistake. Because I was not some distant relative. I was the baby's grandmother. I just nodded politely and stepped aside while my daughter-in-law's mother swept past me carrying balloons and a designer diaper bag. The security guard smiled at her and opened the door immediately. She didn't even look at me. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." The maternity floor smelled like antiseptic and fresh coffee. Nurses moved quickly through the hallways in colorful scrubs while soft lullabies played quietly from hidden speakers overhead. Everywhere I looked, families were celebrating. Young fathers carried flowers. Grandmothers cried while holding newborns. People hugged in hospital corridors as if the whole world had become softer for one beautiful day. And there I sat alone beside the vending machines with a stuffed bear in my lap, like some stranger waiting for the wrong appointment. At 68, I never imagined humiliation could still surprise me. But pain changes shape as you age. When you're young, people break your heart loudly. Doors slam. Voices rise. Cruelty announces itself. When you're older, it becomes quieter, more polished. A missing invitation. An unanswered text. A hospital security list with your name deliberately removed. I checked my phone again. Still nothing from my son, Daniel. 3 hours earlier, he had texted me. "She's in labor, Mom. We'll call you soon." That was it. No update. No picture. No invitation upstairs. Just silence. I stared down at the tiny blue blanket folded neatly in my hands. I had chosen soft cotton yarn because Jessica once mentioned babies had sensitive skin. I remembered sitting by my living room window every evening knitting carefully under a reading lamp while old jazz records played softly in the background. One stitch at a time. One hope at a time. A young nurse walked past me slowly before stopping. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked gently. I forced a smile. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart. Just waiting." She glanced at the flowers in my lap and then toward the locked maternity doors. Something changed in her expression. Not pity exactly. Recognition. As if she suddenly understood far more than I had actually said. And somehow, that hurt even more. I stayed in that hospital waiting area for almost 2 more hours. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because anyone planned to come get me. I stayed because leaving felt too final. Too much like accepting that I no longer belonged in my own family's happiest moments. The television mounted in the corner played some daytime talk show no one was watching. A coffee machine hummed beside me every few minutes. Somewhere down the hallway, a newborn cried, followed by laughter and excited voices. Every sound seemed to remind me that everyone else was being welcomed into something beautiful. Everyone except me. Around noon, I saw Daniel again. He stepped out of the maternity ward wearing wrinkled jeans and the same gray sweatshirt he'd thrown on the night before. His hair looked messy, his face exhausted, but the moment I saw him, my heart still lifted the way it always had since the day I first held him in my arms 39 years ago. "Daniel," I called softly as I stood. He stopped walking. For half a second, something flickered across his face. Surprise. Guilt. Maybe both. Then he glanced back toward the locked doors behind him before walking over quickly. "Mom," he said quietly. "You're still here." "Still here." Not "I'm sorry." Not "Why didn't anyone let you in?" Just surprised that I hadn't disappeared yet. I smiled carefully and held up the flowers. "I brought these for Jessica. And the blanket for the baby." His eyes dropped briefly to the knitted blanket in my arms. "That's nice," he murmured distractedly. "Nice." I remembered when this same boy used to wear sweaters I made for him every winter because we couldn't afford store-bought ones after his father got laid off from the factory back in the 90s. I remembered working double shifts at the diner so he could go to summer basketball camp. I remembered selling my wedding bracelet to help cover his college textbooks freshman year. And now my handmade gift for his son was simply nice. "She's really overwhelmed right now," Daniel continued, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "Jessica just wants a calm environment for the baby." I nodded slowly. The words sounded rehearsed, like he'd already repeated them several times in his head before coming downstairs. "I understand," I said gently. "Childbirth is hard. Relief immediately washed over his face. That was the moment I realized something painful. My son wasn't afraid of hurting me. He was afraid of upsetting his wife. Behind him, the elevator doors opened again. Jessica's parents stepped out carrying shopping bags and takeout coffees. Her mother laughed loudly as she walked past me toward the maternity ward. No security guard stopped them. No one checked their names. Daniel looked embarrassed for exactly 2 seconds before turning toward them. "Oh, good. You made it," he said warmly. I stood there holding my flowers while my own son walked away with another family. And for the first time that day, I stopped feeling confused. Because confusion still leaves room for hope. This felt different. This felt deliberate. I finally left the hospital around 4 that afternoon. Not because anyone asked me to leave. Because I understood I was no longer expected to stay. The roses were beginning to wilt slightly by then. I placed them carefully in the passenger seat beside me along with the untouched teddy bear and drove home through slow afternoon traffic while rain tapped softly against my windshield. The whole drive, I kept replaying the same moment in my mind. You're still here. Such a small sentence. But sometimes the smallest sentences reveal the biggest truths. My house felt painfully quiet when I walked inside. The kitchen still smelled faintly like cinnamon from the muffins I had baked the night before. I had been so excited after Daniel's text announcing Jessica had gone into labor. I barely slept. At 3 in the morning, I stood in my kitchen packing snacks for the hospital like some nervous young mother instead of a retired woman with silver hair and arthritis in both hands. I made homemade banana muffins because Daniel used to love them after stressful nights studying in college. I packed extra bottles of water, protein bars, even a phone charger. None of it ever left my car. I slowly placed the baby blanket on my dining table and sat down beside it. The late afternoon sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor, making the little blue stitches glow softly. That blanket suddenly looked foolish to me. Too hopeful. Too full of love for people who had stopped valuing it. My phone buzzed around 6 o'clock. For one terrible second, I thought maybe Daniel was finally calling to apologize. Instead, it was a Facebook notification. Jessica had posted photos. My chest tightened before I even opened them. The first picture showed Jessica smiling weakly in her hospital bed, while Daniel held the baby proudly against his chest. Her mother stood beside them crying happily. The second photo included Jessica's father, her sister, even her teenage cousin Tyler, holding the baby while everyone laughed. Family only, red heart, that was the caption. I stared at those 2 words for a very long time. Family only. As if I were some outsider trying to sneak into a private event. As if I hadn't spent 39 years raising the man standing beside her. The comments underneath made it worse. Perfect family. Baby already surrounded by so much love. So glad the important people were there. Important people. I set my phone down carefully before my hands started shaking. Then another memory surfaced suddenly. Last Thanksgiving, Jessica had told me the dinner would be small and intimate. Later that night, I saw pictures online of 15 people gathered around their dining room table. Everyone had been invited except me. At Christmas, she claimed the baby shower venue had limited seating, yet her yoga instructor somehow attended. Even on Daniel's birthday dinner 2 months earlier, I'd been seated at the far end of the restaurant while Jessica's family crowded around him, laughing loudly over inside jokes I didn't understand. Little things. Small exclusions. Tiny humiliations spread out over years so quietly that I kept convincing myself they didn't matter. But sitting alone in my kitchen that evening, I finally saw the pattern clearly. This hadn't started at the hospital. The hospital was simply the first time they stopped pretending. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain kept tapping softly against the bedroom windows while the old grandfather clock downstairs echoed through the house every hour. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying memories I had spent years trying to excuse. Funny how the truth becomes obvious once your heart finally stops defending people. Around midnight, I walked into the hallway closet and pulled down an old storage box labeled Daniel. Dust covered the lid. Inside were school photos, birthday cards, little handmade crafts from elementary school, and dozens of memories from a life that suddenly felt very far away. At the bottom of the box, I found a faded photograph of Daniel at 8 years old standing in front of our first apartment building in Chicago. He was missing his 2 front teeth and holding my hand tightly. Back then, it had only been the 2 of us for a while. His father traveled constantly for work, and money was always tight. Some winters, I skipped meals so Daniel could take hot lunches to school instead of peanut butter sandwiches every day. But he never knew that. I made sure he never knew. I stared at that photograph for a long time before another memory surfaced. The first time I met Jessica. She wore a cream-colored sweater dress and carried a pie from some expensive bakery downtown. Very polished. Very charming. She hugged me immediately and called me Mom before dinner was even over. At the time, I thought I was lucky. A warm daughter-in-law. An educated woman from a good family. Someone who loved my son. But looking back now, I realized something uncomfortable. Jessica always performed kindness when people were watching. At restaurants, she held my arm dramatically and called me sweet names loud enough for strangers to hear. Online, she posted birthday tributes about how grateful she was for me. But privately, things were different. Small comments slipped through over the years like tiny paper cuts. You wouldn't understand modern parenting. You're old-fashioned. We need boundaries. Boundaries. That word appeared more and more after the wedding. At first, it was harmless things. Calling before visiting. Not giving advice unless asked. Then it slowly became something else entirely. Holidays shortened. Invitations delayed. Family decisions made without me. And Daniel adapted himself around her like a man slowly learning which version of himself caused the least conflict at home. The hardest part wasn't Jessica. It was watching my son become quieter every year beside her. Less warm. Less certain. Like someone constantly checking another person's face before speaking. I returned the photograph to the box carefully and sat alone at my kitchen table. The house hummed softly around me. Refrigerator motor. Rain outside. Clock ticking. Then my phone buzzed again. Another photo notification. This time it was Jessica's mother holding the baby in the hospital rocking chair I had purchased myself 3 months earlier as a gift for their nursery. I remembered spending almost $400 on that chair after Jessica said she wanted something comfortable for late-night feedings. Under the picture, Jessica wrote, "So grateful for my village." My village. I looked around my empty kitchen and smiled quietly to myself. Because for the first time, I stopped asking the painful question, why am I being excluded? And started asking the more important one, what exactly have I been funding all these years? The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. Not better, just clear. There's a difference. Pain makes noise at first. Anger too. But eventually, if you sit with disappointment long enough, everything becomes very quiet inside you. And in that silence, patterns become impossible to ignore. I made myself coffee and stood by the kitchen window watching early spring rain drip from the maple trees in my backyard. My phone remained silent all morning. No pictures of the baby. No invitation to visit. No apology. By noon, I finally received a text from Daniel. "Hey Mom. Sorry things were hectic yesterday. Jessica and the baby are resting now." That was all. No mention of the security guard. No explanation. No acknowledgement that his own mother had been turned away from meeting her first grandson. I stared at the message for a long moment before setting my phone face down on the counter. Then something unexpected happened. The hospital called me. At first, I thought perhaps something was wrong with the baby. My heart nearly stopped when I heard the nurse introduce herself. But her voice sounded gentle. "Mrs. Bennett? This is Carol from St. Mary's maternity floor. You left a knitted blanket here yesterday." For a second, I forgot I'd even left it behind. "Oh," I said quietly. "Thank you." There was a small pause before she spoke again. "I just thought you should know," she hesitated carefully. "Your grandson sleeps with that blanket every night in the nursery. The nurses love it." My throat tightened unexpectedly. "Jessica almost sent it home with the gift bags," Carol added softly. "But one of the pediatric nurses kept it because the baby calmed down whenever he was wrapped in it." I closed my eyes. Even after all that humiliation, some part of me still melted hearing those words. Because love does not disappear simply because people treat it carelessly. "That's very kind of you to tell me," I whispered. Another pause. Then Carol lowered her voice slightly. "I probably shouldn't say this, but I saw what happened yesterday." I didn't answer. "I've worked maternity for 22 years, she continued. "And usually when someone removes a grandmother from the approved list, there's family conflict involved." Family conflict. Such polite words for cruelty. "But you didn't seem angry," she said quietly. "You just looked hurt." I let out a small laugh under my breath. "At my age," I told her, "you learn that public scenes only entertain the wrong people." Carol was silent for a moment before saying something that stayed with me long after the call ended. Sometimes the quiet ones are the people holding everyone else together. After we hung up, I stood alone in my kitchen thinking about that sentence. Holding everyone else together. Maybe that had been my role for so long that nobody noticed anymore. Like electricity in the walls. Always there. Only missed once it disappears. Then my eyes drifted toward the folder sitting unopened near the fruit bowl on my counter. Mortgage documents. Daniel's mortgage documents. The house loan I had co-signed 5 years earlier when the bank said his income alone wasn't enough. Slowly, I picked up the folder. And for the first time since the hospital, I began reading every page carefully. I spent the rest of that afternoon sitting at my dining table with Daniel's mortgage papers spread out in front of me. 5 years earlier, the bank had rejected his first application because his credit score wasn't strong enough. Jessica had been furious about it at the time. I still remembered her pacing around my kitchen complaining about outdated lending systems, while Daniel sat quietly staring at the floor. Back then, I stepped in without hesitation. Because that's what mothers do. I co-signed the loan using my retirement savings and my house as additional collateral. The banker had warned me privately before I signed. If they miss payments, ma'am, the responsibility falls to you. I remember smiling confidently. My son would never let that happen. Funny how certain we are right before life teaches us otherwise. As I flipped through the paperwork now, something caught my attention immediately. 3 late payments. Not huge delays. Just enough to trigger warning notices from the bank. I frowned. Daniel had a good job in medical equipment sales. Jessica worked remotely for some marketing company. They constantly posted expensive dinners, weekend winery trips, and perfectly staged family photos online. So why were they behind on the mortgage? I kept reading. Then my stomach tightened. 2 months earlier, they had applied for a home equity line of credit against the house. They wanted additional borrowing access. My signature authorization line appeared near the bottom of one page. And signed. A cold feeling crept slowly through my chest. They had planned to borrow against that house again. Without even speaking to me first. I leaned back in my chair staring at the rain outside, while old memories surfaced one by one. The $70,000 I contributed toward their down payment after Daniel said rent prices were destroying their future. The nursery furniture I purchased when Jessica announced her pregnancy. The hospital rocking chair. The designer stroller. Even the baby monitor system still sitting unopened in my hallway closet waiting to be delivered. I had spent years convincing myself I was helping build stability for my son's growing family. But suddenly, another possibility became impossible to ignore. What if I had simply become useful? My phone buzzed again around dinner time. A new family group chat notification. Jessica had sent another picture of the baby wrapped in the blanket I knitted. Underneath it, she wrote, "Baby Ethan finally settled after hours of crying face with tears of joy. Guess he likes expensive taste after all." Her mother replied instantly. "Just like his mama Red Heart." Then Jessica added, "Good thing some people actually know how to soothe him." I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Maybe another grandmother would have ignored the comment, pretended it wasn't aimed at her. But cruelty becomes easier to recognize once you stop making excuses for it. The message wasn't accidental. It was bait. A quiet little humiliation placed carefully into a public room where everyone could see it while still pretending innocence. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I simply closed the chat. No argument. No tears. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. Because something inside me had started changing. For years, I kept trying to earn my place in their lives through generosity. Money. Time. Patience. Forgiveness. But sitting there alone at my kitchen table, I realized something painful. People rarely value what they never had to work for. And for the first time in a very long while, I stopped thinking like a mother. I started thinking like a woman protecting what remained of her life. 3 days passed before Daniel finally invited me to meet the baby. Not at the hospital. At their house. Sunday afternoon. The message itself felt strangely formal. "Mom, you can stop by around 2 if you want to see Ethan. If you want to." As though meeting my first grandson were some casual neighborhood event I might or might not attend. Still, I said yes. Because no matter how wounded a mother becomes, hope survives longer than dignity sometimes. I baked banana muffins again that morning out of habit more than excitement. The kitchen smelled warm and sweet while soft jazz played from the radio near the sink. For a few peaceful moments, life almost felt normal. Then I remembered the security guard, the waiting room, family only, and the feeling disappeared again. I arrived at their townhouse exactly at 2 carrying the muffins and the unopened baby monitor system still sitting in my hallway closet. The same house I had helped them buy stood polished and picture-perfect beneath the pale afternoon sun. Fresh landscaping, new patio furniture, a luxury SUV parked in the driveway. Interesting, considering their mortgage payments were suddenly late. Jessica opened the front door after my second knock. "Oh," she said flatly, clearly surprised I'd come exactly on time. Not "hi," not "come in," just "oh." She wore expensive cream-colored loungewear and held Ethan against her chest like a magazine advertisement for modern motherhood. For a brief moment, my heart softened anyway. He was beautiful. Tiny fingers, dark hair like Daniel's, sleepy little face pressed against her shoulder. "My grandson. Can I hold him?" I asked gently. Jessica hesitated. Not long enough for someone else to notice, but long enough for me. "He just fell asleep," she said carefully while stepping sideways to let me enter. "Maybe later." The living room looked staged for guests. Fresh flowers, candles burning, a charcuterie board spread across the kitchen island. Jessica's parents were already there drinking wine comfortably as though they owned the place. Her mother smiled brightly when she saw me. "Oh good, you made it." "Made it." Interesting choice of words. Daniel appeared moments later carrying plates from the kitchen. He kissed my cheek quickly before returning to helping Jessica's father uncork another bottle of wine. No one offered me a seat, so I quietly sat in the armchair near the window by myself. From there, I watched the room carefully. Jessica's mother held Ethan 3 separate times within the first hour. Jessica's cousin took photos with him. Even Jessica's teenage sister walked around the living room bouncing him gently while everyone laughed. But every time I moved slightly forward in my chair, Jessica somehow redirected the moment. "He needs feeding. He's fussy." He finally settled. Always calm, always polite. That was her talent. Cruelty wrapped inside perfect manners. Then, while carrying empty glasses back toward the kitchen, I accidentally overheard Jessica speaking softly to her mother near the hallway. "I just don't want her getting too attached," she whispered. Her mother laughed quietly. "Well, after everything she pays for, of course she feels entitled." Entitled? I stopped walking. The words settled into my chest heavier than anger. Because suddenly everything became painfully clear. They did not see my love as generosity. They saw it as obligation attached to an older woman they merely tolerated. I stayed another hour after hearing that conversation. Not because I wanted to. Because leaving immediately would have exposed how deeply those words affected me. So I sat quietly in that armchair near the window while laughter floated around the room like background music from a life I no longer belonged to. At one point, Daniel finally noticed I hadn't touched the wine or food. "You okay, Mom?" he asked casually. Casually, as though I were just tired instead of slowly realizing my place in his family had been reduced to a financial resource with a pulse. "I'm fine," I said with a small smile. And strangely enough, that part wasn't entirely a lie anymore. Because once illusions break completely, there's a certain peace in finally seeing things clearly. A little later, Jessica disappeared upstairs with the baby while everyone else gathered around the kitchen island talking about vacation plans for summer. Napa Valley, private rental house, wine tours. Jessica's father joked about needing a grandparents-only getaway once the baby became older. Everyone laughed. Then Daniel said something that made my stomach turn cold. "Well, Mom probably won't travel much anymore anyway." I looked up slowly. He didn't even realize what he had said. Or maybe he did. At 68, people start speaking around you differently. Like your future has already become smaller without your permission. Jessica's mother glanced toward me politely. "Retirement changes priorities, right?" Retirement. Another interesting word. Because while they discussed luxury vacations in a house I helped finance, I was suddenly being spoken about like some aging woman nearing the final quiet chapter of her usefulness. I folded my hands carefully in my lap and watched them laugh together. Then my eyes drifted toward the hallway. That was when I noticed it. A framed family photograph hanging near the staircase. Jessica holding the baby, Daniel beside her, her parents standing proudly behind them. Printed underneath in elegant cursive lettering, the family Ethan was born into. I stared at the picture for several seconds. No space for me anywhere. Not even symbolically. Something inside me settled at that moment. Not anger. Something colder. Acceptance. I stood quietly and walked toward the kitchen counter where I had left the unopened baby monitor box earlier. I almost forgot, I said softly. This is for Ethan. Jessica glanced at the brand name, and her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh wow, she said quickly. This model is expensive. There it was again. Not emotional warmth. Not gratitude. Recognition of value. Daniel finally looked uncomfortable. Mom, you really didn't have to keep buying things, he murmured. I looked directly at him for the first time all afternoon. You're right, I said calmly. The room became oddly quiet for half a second. Not because my tone changed, because something inside it had. Jessica recovered first with a tight little smile. Well, we appreciate everything. Everything. Such a useful word when people don't want to specify exactly what they've taken from you. A few minutes later, I picked up my purse and headed for the front door. No one asked me to stay longer. No one walked me to my car except Daniel. Outside, the evening air felt cool. Against my skin. Mom, he said awkwardly beside the driveway. Jessica's just adjusting to motherhood. Don't take things personally. I looked at my son standing under the porch light of the home I helped buy. Then I smiled softly. Oh, sweetheart, I said gently. I think that's exactly what I've been doing wrong all these years. And for the first time, Daniel looked genuinely nervous. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment with my bank. Not out of revenge. Out of caution. There's a moment in life when survival instincts finally overpower emotional loyalty. I think mine arrived sometime around midnight after staring at that framed photograph on Daniel's wall. The family Ethan was born into. As if I had merely funded the frame. The bank branch sat downtown near the River Walk, inside one of those modern glass buildings that always smelled faintly like coffee and printer ink. I had been banking there for almost 30 years. Long enough that some employees still recognized me by name. Mrs. Bennett. The receptionist smiled warmly. How's retirement treating you? I smiled politely. Educational, I replied. A young loan officer named Mark brought me into his office and pulled up Daniel's mortgage account on the computer. I noticed his expression shift slightly once he reviewed the payment history. Is everything all right? He asked carefully. That depends, I said calmly. I'd like to understand exactly how exposed I am financially. He explained everything slowly. Because I had co-signed the loan, I remained fully responsible if Daniel and Jessica defaulted. Late payments could affect my own credit. If foreclosure happened, the bank could pursue my retirement assets depending on the situation. I listened quietly while my stomach tightened more with every sentence. Then came the part that truly opened my eyes. The recent line of credit request was denied, Mark added. I looked up immediately. Denied. He nodded. Insufficient income stability combined with existing debt obligations. Debt obligations. Interesting. Because online, Daniel and Jessica presented themselves like wealthy young professionals living some polished suburban dream. But the numbers told a different story. Car loans, credit card balances, luxury spending, mortgage strain. And suddenly, Jessica's little comments about boundaries and stress started sounding very different to me. Not emotional. Financial. Can they reopen the request without me? I asked. No, Mark said. Not unless you approve and sign. A strange calm settled over me. For years, I had worried constantly about saying or doing the wrong thing and losing access to my son's life. But sitting there in that office, I finally understood something important. They needed me far more than they wanted me. That changes everything. Before leaving, I requested copies of every document connected to the mortgage and any attempted credit expansion. Mark handed me the folder carefully. You're smart to review this, he said gently. A lot of parents don't realize how vulnerable co-signing can make them later. Vulnerable. Another polite word. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light and stared at my reflection in the windshield. Gray hair. Tired eyes. A woman nearing 70. Jessica probably looked at me and saw someone fading quietly toward the edges of life. But age teaches things youth never understands. Young people think power looks loud. Money. Status. Control. Real power is quieter. Real power is knowing exactly when to stop giving people access to what sustains them. That afternoon, Daniel finally texted again. Hey Mom, Jessica was wondering if you'd still be helping with daycare costs once maternity leave ends. I stared at the message for a very long time. No apology. No mention of the hospital. No acknowledgement of anything that had happened. Just another request. And for the first time in my life as a mother, I didn't rush to answer immediately. A week later, Daniel and Jessica hosted a welcome baby Ethan dinner at their house. Jessica called it small and intimate online. There were 23 people there. I counted. The moment I walked inside, I understood exactly where I stood in that room. Jessica's family filled the kitchen laughing loudly over wine glasses and catered appetizers. Her father stood near the fireplace, showing baby photos to guests while her mother carried Ethan around like royalty, presenting an air. No one greeted me immediately, not even Daniel. I quietly placed the wrapped baby gifts beside a crowded table already overflowing with expensive presents and scanned the room for an empty seat. There was only one left, a folding chair near the hallway beside the bathroom door. Interesting, because I had purchased the dining table sitting at the center of the room 2 Christmases earlier after Jessica said they couldn't afford proper entertaining furniture. I sat down calmly anyway. At my age, pride becomes less important than observation. And that night, I observed everything. Jessica floated through the party wearing a pale blue dress, smiling for photos while guests praised the baby and complimented the house. Every few minutes, someone handed her another gift bag while she laughed modestly like the perfect young mother from a television commercial. Daniel barely looked at me the entire evening, but he looked nervous. I noticed that too. About an hour into dinner, Jessica tapped her wine glass lightly for attention. I just want to thank everyone who's truly shown up for us during this beautiful season of life, she said emotionally. Truly shown up. Several people nodded warmly around the room. Our village means everything, she continued while glancing toward her parents. Having people we can rely on makes all the difference. Again, that word. Village. Funny how often people romanticize support once they've grown dependent on it. Then Jessica smiled softly and added the sentence that finally changed something permanent inside me. Not everyone who shares your blood truly acts like family. The room grew quieter after that. Not silent, just uncomfortable enough for people to suddenly study their wine glasses instead of each other's faces. Daniel shifted slightly beside her, but said nothing. Nothing. That hurt more than her words. Because betrayal from strangers wounds your pride. Betrayal from your child rearranges something inside your bones. I looked around the dining room slowly, at the expensive candles I had once gifted them. The kitchen renovation I helped finance after Daniel lost his bonus 1 year. The stroller parked beside the staircase. The rocking chair upstairs. The house itself. So much of their polished little life carried fingerprints they no longer acknowledged. And suddenly, I no longer felt sad. I felt awake. Jessica lifted her glass again. To family, she smiled. Everyone echoed the toast. I picked up my water quietly. Then, for the first time all evening, I spoke. You're absolutely right, Jessica, I said calmly. Every head turned toward me. I smiled politely. Support should never be mistaken for obligation. The room became very still. Jessica blinked once. Daniel looked down immediately. And in that moment, I realized something important. They had grown so comfortable disrespecting me that they never imagined I might eventually stop accepting it. I left their house that night without raising my voice once. No slammed doors. No dramatic speech. Just the soft sound of my heels against the front walkway while cold night air wrapped around me like clarity. Behind me, I could hear muffled voices through the door. Daniel's voice low and panicked. Jessica's sharper now. No longer polished. No longer carefully sweet. Funny how quickly manners disappear once access to money becomes uncertain. I drove home slowly through quiet suburban streets glowing with porch lights and freshly watered lawns. Families sat inside eating dessert, watching television, living ordinary little evenings. For the first time in weeks, I didn't cry during the drive, because grief and humiliation had finally burned themselves out. What remained was something calmer. Self-respect. The next few days became strangely quiet. Daniel called 3 times. I didn't ignore him. I simply stopped answering immediately. That alone seemed to unsettle him more than anger ever had. Jessica never contacted me directly, but I noticed something interesting online. The family photos slowed down. The expensive dinners disappeared. Even the cheerful little captions about their village suddenly stopped. Reality has a way of interrupting performance. A week later, I received official confirmation from the bank that the refinancing process had begun. That same afternoon, Daniel showed up at my front door unannounced. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like stress had finally reached the surface. I invited him inside anyway. Because no matter how deeply your child hurts you, motherhood never fully leaves the body. He sat across from me at the kitchen table where I had once helped him with fourth-grade spelling homework. The same table where years later I balanced my checkbook trying to stretch grocery money after his father died. Life moves in circles that way. Mom, he said quietly, things have gotten really difficult. I stirred cream slowly into my coffee, but said nothing. He looked around the kitchen like he suddenly noticed the house differently. The old cabinets, the worn wooden floors, the simple life I had built carefully after decades of sacrifice. Then his eyes lowered. I should have handled things differently, he admitted softly. Not a full apology, but closer than anything I had heard from him in years. I nodded once. Yes, I said gently. You should have. Silence settled between us. Not hostile, just honest. After a while, he pulled out his phone and showed me a picture of Ethan sleeping with the little blue blanket I had knitted. He still won't sleep without it, Daniel said quietly. My chest tightened despite everything. Love is complicated that way. Even wounded hearts still recognize innocence. I never wanted to keep you away from him, Daniel added. I looked at my son carefully. No, I said softly. You just got comfortable watching it happen. That sentence seemed to hit him harder than the mortgage papers ever had. Before leaving, he stopped near the front door. Do you think things can still be fixed? He asked. I thought about the hospital hallway, the security guard, family only. Then I thought about all the years before that, the small exclusions, the tolerated disrespect, the quiet humiliations wrapped inside polite smiles. Finally, I looked at him calmly. Families can survive mistakes, I said, but not entitlement. He lowered his eyes immediately. After he left, I made myself tea and sat alone by the living room window while evening sunlight faded across the yard. The house was quiet, peacefully quiet, and for the first time in a very long while, I understood something important. That day at the hospital, they thought they were shutting me out of the family. What they really did was finally force me to stop abandoning myself just to stay included.